Hello.
Hey,
We are back in air. This is Biweeklycast. This is episode number 50, despite some people trying to persuade me otherwise. The host is still here. I'm Dima.
I'm Slava, and I'm wondering who these other people are.
You should have asked, are they with us in the same room or something? Yeah, I'm hearing voices for sure.
So today we are going to have a follow-up to one of our previous discussions.
Yeah, I'll put it more cautiously. I'll say we are going to try to have a follow-up for one of our previous discussions, and we'll
Yeah.
see how it goes.
It was episode 47, Can You Be More Specific, where we tried to see why people can't be more specific. And we were not specific enough to finalize the discussion, so here's another try. But before that, there is a theme corner.
Yeah, theme corner. I was hesitating of putting something here or saying just please give me a break. It's not going too well, I guess. But then I reflected on it a little bit, and it made a little bit of sense to me. As you might remember, my theme for this year was Year of Next, and now I think that at some point, maybe even in the beginning, I made a mistake of not really treating this thing as a theme. I think I may have overinvested myself in specific next things that I wanted to happen, which didn't for this, that, or other reason. And roughly by the August, September time, it started giving me kind of a little bit of an anxiety that I knew that things are not things that I wanted to happen this year probably aren't happening because I was trying to hit sort of specific things at work and in some other areas. But then now thinking, kind of looking back about at this, I think that one maybe treated more this as a smarty goal without really supporting with action and sort of resolve that would be required for a smart goal. And I came to realize that if I treat it more as a theme, it's more optimistic because I think through my actions and kind of other circumstances, I think I figure out really good, maybe even great next thing for me at work in my professional kind of thing. I nonetheless, even though I didn't hit maybe specific things in photography, I nonetheless did quite a lot in terms of education. I attended several kind of workshops which gave me inspiration and ideas to move forward. I tried to participate in a number of competitions and stuff like that, which I didn't get anything out of that, but I got experience. I got to maybe somewhat better understand how this world works. Not to say the expectations and how to game the machine, but I definitely understand better and more about how this stuff works to give me a better chance when I try next time. So from that perspective, it may be not as bad.
Would it be fair to say that you New Year resolutionized the theme?
Yes, this would be very fair to say that. And I think what contributed to that was that once I remember saying this in one of the episodes, I see that there is very strong correlation between me stopping journaling and things starting going astray. And I think that's it. And it kind of contributes. There were periods where I almost stopped, well, not almost, just stopped journaling, including the theme reflections. Should I have done that, I would have caught that, things need adjustment, like mindset or something needs adjustment. I didn't do that, and it made things worse because it felt like things are going even worse than they are. No time for journaling, that vicious cycle. But it's definitely it's a nice way of putting it. You have a new year resolutionized your theme.
Your theme started last December, right? Or January? It was.
I think knowing myself, I would want to say that it must have been aligned with the start of calendar year rather than December, I think.
Which means that the new theme is about to come.
Yes, but I have not finalized thinking about that yet.
I think it's going to be the year after next.
The year of next returns or something. Yes, it could be.
I've noticed that sometimes, your theme can be different by the nature from the previous year, and sometimes it's basically a follow-up or something along the same lines, but just differently with a twist or upgrade or improvement or something like that. I think Gray named it like theme families. So there are theme families of making something new, theme families of making something less, or cutting on things, all these kind of stuff.
Right. And I think that there is this element to this. I was for a moment contemplating, like, should I kind of keep going, just say really like next year of next V2 or something like that, but probably I would not go there. It would be too lame. But at the same time, like, why not, right? This should not be limited by artificial boundaries, mostly.
Absolutely. The only thing that if you learn your lesson about journaling and keeping themes as themes, not as New Year resolutions, I think it should be fine.
Right. Should not be too bad. And yeah, I'm hoping like to be back in journaling once again, kind of regularly. I even got myself a early Christmas present of I already had, based on your advice, I've got the fountain pen, like the simplest one. I got slightly upgraded one. Let's see how it goes.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So, to the topic.
To the topic, like in episode number 47, as you said, we started. How do we describe it? Shall we describe it as I started venting my frustration about people sometimes not being specific about what they mean or what they're trying to achieve or what the plans they lay forward for achieving that, which gets themselves and people around them or those who are working with them in trouble down the line, in various kinds of trouble. That does not necessarily need to mean like bad trouble. It can be just maybe waste of time and additional kind of cycles that need to be spent to clarify misconceptions or misunderstandings here and there. Then by the end of that episode, I think we realized that I was not specific enough about what I'm trying to say. And I'll try to approach this from a different angle. Instead of trying to say, oh, like, this is the big scheme of things, these are the definitions and stuff, I'll maybe try to explore together with you what those definitions could be and what the big scheme of thing is by looking at several smaller examples of what I think are relatively common examples when in communication people are not specific enough, and it would be beneficial for them to be more specific in those instances. And then we'll see if that makes sense to call them, to put them in one basket, or maybe say like, no, that those, while they look similarly, they are different, and so on. Maybe, well, I said let's start with examples and then go to definitions. One kind of definition I would want to introduce, ever since I first came across this notion, I keep returning to it. I don't remember how I came across it, but here it is. Like, there is this idea of jingle and jungle fallacies, which goes the way I always mix them, therefore I copied the definitions here. They say the definition of jingle fallacy is thinking that two different things are the same because we refer to them with the same name. Well, we call something the same, but things are distinct. I should have come up with an example. I come across this a lot in like system design, where I say, this is a router. Yes, this is a router, but they do kind of entirely different things and work in different contexts. And yes, in individual contexts, they are routers, but they are not the same thing, even though we use the same name. And the opposite coin of this fallacy is jungle fallacy, where we call where we look at two very similar or almost identical things, but because of some circumstances, they are labeled differently, and therefore we treat them differently, even though they are the same and should be treated the same. Have you ever come across something like this?
Yeah, pretty much all the time. I think there was a very nice picture about that illustrated communication, highlighting two people, then a symbol somewhere in between, and people interpreting this symbol based on the background and the context that they have had. And whenever someone is saying this is a guide, you just remember the guides that you have seen. I remember the guides that I have seen, and we could be thinking about very different essence.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right. That's a very important aspect of communication, like relying on the background. And I think maybe my first example would be connected to that. And an example which I labeled for good or for worse, like we will figure out like whether all of the things that fall into this bucket can be labeled the same, is system X is broken. Me being an engineer in professional setting and otherwise, I often deal with something being broken. And wanted to say like to my endless frustration, but it would be too dramatic. I get irritated about it when something happens and people, instead of providing factual information, like this is, instead of saying system is broken, saying I clicked this button and nothing happens, which is what they actually observe. They start saying like everything is broken, the system is down, and whatever else it might be, where they then assume that the audience who they communicate with saw or know what the actual speaker or communicator saw or know previously, making it all but impossible to start taking action on that, and requires kind of getting back to the raw facts and so on. And depending on the situation, if the person is in front of you, you can start digging into that right away. Let's say if they are in a different time zone, they sent you an email, everything is broken, and you receive this in the morning. And what I'm supposed to do about that? I need more information, and preferably more factual information.
Well, man, there are layers here.
All right, so let's try to unwrap them.
If we put it into communication that happens asynchronously, and like when you just email people, and who you are emailing and why you're emailing, I think that one of the golden rules of a nice message is to have a clear call to action to all people there, to know who is just being informed about it and who should do something about it. And basically, after saying that system is broken, they probably wanted to say, Dima, I need your opinion on that. And Alex, I would like to get your help with this and that. And Bob, just please keep an eye on us doing this stuff because it's your job. But I think that system is broken is basically the final line that should have some preconditions, right? And these preconditions could have been explained previously. 3 messages ago, 5 messages ago, they could have been discussed at the meeting, and then this email comes over. So I'm not sure whether it was discussed or it wasn't discussed. That's why it's kind of hard to say whether this conclusion was based on something or not. If I just get a message that our sales are ineffective, all right, let's look at some data. If we see that there are some facts, like our funnel has gotten worse and we've lost a few strategic leads to some sort of services, which means that our sales are ineffective. It still doesn't mean that our sales are ineffective, but at least it gives you some data points to work with. And I think that it's very different depending whether it's a spoken conversation or a written conversation, because for the spoken one, you might jump to conclusions and then you can just on the spot ask questions and clarify things. If it's a written communication, it's a bit more demanding, because if you decided to communicate such things in text, it probably means that a lot of people will be reading that and they might need a way to get into the context. You don't have to put all the context into this message, but there must be a link to a specific note or extra details or some cards that illustrate what you're saying.
I agree with everything that you say, indeed, like the bandwidth of communication makes a lot, because if there is an opportunity to clarify, you just engage, and there is a process of figuring out what's going on, that's totally fine. You don't need to be super precise, but otherwise it helps to be more specific. And I also agree with you about the context, and the way how I approach situations like this. For example, like I sort of, like I said, I'm irritated when I'm added to the chat, this long discussion of what's going on, like something broken or something is abnormal and we need to investigate. And the last message I see, adding Dima to the chat to help. Help with what? What specifically is going on? Like, do I need to read, like, obviously I need to read this entire chat thread, but it is so helpful to get something right ahead. And like you said, like even short summary with navigational links to, oh, like you might want to look at this, at that to get better, bigger context would be helpful. And that's why when I add new people into a situation like this, my message before I add a person would be, I'm adding X and I'm saying, this is what we observing. We think this might mean X. John, we need you to help with XYZ in that regard to at least get the person situated, because I think that way they would be able to start helping us faster, which is what I think we want in that situation.
And, I think that we are basically speaking about some fundamentals or basics of communications here. And fun fact that the same person could be communicating the same issue into different places very differently, depending on the state of mind, emotional conditions, etc. As an example, I, as a manager, tend to skip retrospectives at the end of my projects that I run.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're important, and I occasionally run retrospectives, but not always. The same thing when I initiate something. In my best days, I would write a one-pager explaining the concepts, providing preconditions, sending it before the meeting, and then talking to people. But in my worst days, I can just randomly call a person and ask for help, explaining everything on the fly. And these are both examples of my communication styles, but in different days, in different situations, in different contexts. So I would probably start with the question, is it this person's behavior or style of communication in different cases or just in this specific one? Like, has this person demonstrated an ability to provide context and examples on some other occasions, and just here it didn't happen because of whatever reasons? Then I could just briefly talk to this person or ask, like, what's up, and probably this person will catch up and help me. Or maybe it's a systematic mishap that keeps going on, and then it requires some education or more detailed corrective feedback explaining why things shouldn't work this way.
I agree with that. And one other layer, circling back to what you said previously, I think when you said that the communication should have clear call to action, to me, this is, if not the key to this whole thing, but definitely a good clue how to improve this stuff. Because I think when you are to communicate to someone about what you need from them, if you do that clearly rather than saying, oh, like everything is broken. Okay, thank you for giving me this information, right? I can just close this, like, okay, you're dealing, this is broken, you're dealing with it, that's fine. I'll keep doing my things. So it is helpful to have a clear call to action. But then when you think about that clear call to action, when you try to articulate it and make it like really clear and, for the lack of a better word, specific, it should kind of give you a pause and get you thinking about what is required for the person to be able to follow this call to action. And you say, oh, they would need XYZ. Let's lay it out for them so that they can actually do that call to action. Otherwise, it's like sending an email, please subscribe to our services, with no link to the services or who you are or something like that.
Well, on the other hand, if there is a group of people, they might be quite different in terms of the context that they require to make a decision. Just think about my colleagues, Artem and Anya. Artem is quite low context. I could just text him, like, I need your help with project X. We are kicking off. Please hop in. He will ask me 5 questions he needs to know. I will answer these 5 questions and he will hop in. Anya requires a long pre-story before she decides whether she's going to help me or whether she understands how to help me. So she would require like a pre-story from the CRM with the client, all the screenshots from the communication and everything before she even agrees to do something. So I think it also depends on like who your audience is and whether you understand their level of context required to make a decision, because some people just don't need that. And maybe in the previous experience, the person just was working in a very low context team and they could catch the idea and the concept quite quickly. And then they would just ask and clarify things that they needed. But when they get to a bigger team or to people from different cultures or people from different context requirements, I think it could be very different. And I notice it by myself because most of my teammates are low context. And sometimes I take it as a default communication style, and I have to actually intentionally provide more details and information when I'm talking to people from alternative teams.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And it also got me thinking about one more dimension of this thing. Indeed, you are 100% right that people might have different requirements or expectations for when they start engaging with something new and responding to call to action. But it also got me thinking that it might be dependent on the amount of involvement the person expects to put into this task, because you can imagine that, well, you have your trusted colleagues and stuff, and when you come across a big problem, you cannot work on it yourself. You may call just Barbara and say, hey Barbara, need your help with this is what we know, like kind of go figure out. Without the call to action is kind of go figure out with very low context, and maybe in some of those situations you would not even want, not having context yourself, you would not want to taint the perception of the situation for someone else. It's better for them to have a fresh eyes, like totally fresh eyes on something. This way you just, yeah, the requirements for a lot of specific information may not apply in that situation. But at the same time, if I get something which is like a task or something that like administrative action that I need to do, which by definition should take as little of my time as possible, for something tiny like that, you instead would expect a whole bunch of contextual and specific information what needs to be done so that you can spend as little time on this thing as possible.
You know, as I was listening to you, I think that some people might also fail to see the difference between the level of the task, because sometimes they're delegating you to do a specific thing, like this button is broken, please fix it. Sometimes they're delegating you to figure out the problem, like something seems wrong, could you please check it out and give your opinion, and I will make a decision. Sometimes they can delegate you the responsibility for something, like this system is not functioning, my conclusion, please make sure it's functioning, and you are responsible to investigate, find all the details, and do everything. So, depending on this level, I can imagine that if I invite my people to run a market research in a different country, I probably should provide more context and explanation. Why this market, why these people, what are the roles, and how it's going to work. I can just get them into the copy of the message and say, like, please go and talk to people in Prague about something. But if I'm asking them to do something that they have been doing, like, I don't know, competitors analysis, like I just find another competitor, we've been studying competitors for years, there is a smooth flow here, I can just drop the name of the competitor in the chat, tag the responsible person, and that's it.
I think that once again, this is a great discussion. We kind of unwrapping multiple layers, but to me, that still circles back to this whole idea of call to action and understanding what that is and what would be required to effectively sort of follow that call to action.
Alexey Kavlenko, my colleague from business writing course, suggests that there are a few types of call to action in the message. That there could be for your information message that should be labeled like that. Like, I don't expect any actions from you, Dima. Just please read it if you will. Then there is a close question like yes, no, or when, that requires a very short answer from you that doesn't require a lot of preparation. There is an open-ended question where people ask you like, what's your opinion on this, or how do you think we should approach that, or what's the difference between this and that, or could you share your background here? Then there is a decision, like you basically would like to get an approval from someone, like is it okay or is it not okay, like these are my thoughts, this is my conclusion, like would it be fine for you if we do that? Like, yeah, go for it. No, don't. Or an actual request. Request means the person should go and do things somewhere outside of this window. Like you should leave the messenger, go somewhere, perform something, and then go back to the messenger and interact with these people again. And if it's a request for actions, this is where you have to be very detailed and precise and explanatory, providing different levels of context.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Two points on that. First, maybe if you're still doing this course on communication, we should put a link in the show notes so that people can get there and kind of practice or learn more about effective communication, because I think that's great. Blessings, that's number one. Number two, blessings to people who are specific with their call to actions, and especially those who are specific with saying that, no, I don't expect you to do anything, but I thought it might be useful or interesting for you to know this. Huge thanks for all people with OCD to those who do that.
I think it also comes with experience when people just can say like, this is a not urgent request, or like a not urgent question, or like if you can communicate the subject and the matter of importance and urgency, these two things, they really help.
Especially if you do that consistently, that also helps. And that it brings, like you said, like sometimes with people who you work closely with, you would have such a relationship that a wink would be meaningful and will convey a lot of information. If you're consistent with your style of communication, that also helps going forward. I think we unwrapped a lot of stuff about this case number one. System X is broken. Be precise with your communication. Have clear calls to action and provide necessary information to follow those call to actions. So shall we move to the next one, which I labeled as Uber for X? This would be the idea when I'm not sure, maybe I'm a little bit dramatic here, but once again, in pursuit of succinctness and cuteness or something, we can resort to analogies and stuff like that to try to convey our ideas, which I don't think always helps. Like saying, I want to do Uber for mail delivery. Like, what exactly? My first question would be like, what exactly does that? So I'll pause here. Like, have you come across situations like
A little pre-story. I was at a debate training in Galway, Ireland. And there was a guy from Japan who was explaining different ways people can illustrate their idea. And some of the most obvious were to give an example of something, or to provide some expert opinion, statistics, specific names, titles. And this work for most people. Like if you would like to say, please work out because it's healthy, you probably should back it up with something. And backing it up could work on very specific levels, like give me data and give me expert opinions. But one of the most interesting things that doesn't really work for me personally, and I think based on this example doesn't really work for you, are metaphors. And metaphors do work for people from high context societies, like where they communicate indirectly and they try to convey a message without being very, very specific, but they still want to give you some space for thinking and considering and for your own thought process. It's like the feedback thing. Yeah, some people prefer to get their feedback as straight as possible, and some people prefer to get it very secretly hidden in between the lines. I think the metaphors are also a tool that works for those kind of people. They are used to analyzing metaphors and digesting the idea behind them. As an example, this guy was comparing storing nuclear radiative elements in somewhere underground in the country with the metaphor of a park. Like imagine you're managing a park and you have some waste and you have to keep this waste somewhere. And this metaphor is wrong, like no, that's not how you manage the park, and that's not how you store nuclear energy. But for many people in that audience, this metaphor did bring the idea that yes, there is big territory, yes, you can fix a located area and get all the dangerous stuff there, so no one else would be affected. And metaphors don't work for people. Moreover, you don't really know how they will percept them, because Uber could be both as positive and negative example. Like some people have think that this platform is not effective, or but if you think about the business model, like Airbnb or Uber, I think that when people bring in such examples, what they mean is this type of business or this type of system. And what this type of system means to you and to them, once again, really differs, because I haven't been using Uber for years, and maybe they've changed something or now it's a better service, but it didn't work for me. That's why like this metaphor just wouldn't ring the bell.
And specifically on that, we as users of Uber, we only see the tip of the iceberg, right? We never were the drivers for Uber. We don't know how that side of business works. And saying Uber for access, and what does it mean? And like I put in the notes, something like that does more to just inspire imagination rather than to kind of share or convey ideas. Yeah, I can construct a whole bunch of interesting stuff based on your metaphor, but what exactly are we looking at? That's really missing there. I think I would somewhat disagree with the idea, somewhat, not fully, somewhat disagree with the idea that when you said that metaphor is not working, and you also said like metaphor is not working for me, and I'm like, no, I think metaphors are working a little bit. They're doing a little bit of a job there. I think they cannot be the only means to describe the idea. If you just provide a metaphor and stop there, that's bad. That's not working. That is just you're trying to be fancy, I think. But at the same time, if two thoughts, if you clearly communicate the idea for what it is and then use metaphor to shed different kinds of light on this idea, it can be helpful. And also, what was the second thought there? Okay, I forgot about this. Yeah. Okay. As always, I should have put notes more specific or more precise notes there. But in general, I think that metaphors can still add a little bit of color if they are accompanied, or if not, if they are accompanied by more precise description, but vice versa, they can provide color to a more precise description to make it more vivid for people. And now I remember the second thing. The second thing would be, I think in general, it is helpful to define new concepts in relation to other things that are already familiar to people, but you still have to be sort of explicit about that. Like you cannot just throw it. It works like Uber. Like in which exact way does it work like Uber? But going in a little of detail and maybe relying on people's understanding or perception of what Uber is to better describe your idea can be helpful, but it needs to be done kind of in relation and explicitly and intentionally that way.
You know, I would say that it still seriously depends on how well you know the person you're talking to. Because let's take us as an example. We've been recording for quite a while, and we know a number of things that could really make our communication faster and more effective. Let's say we are discussing a new format or a new episode style. And I could tell you, well, let's make it like State of the Apps, but about cars and motorcycles. This metaphor works perfectly because I know that you listen to Cortex. I know you know this type of the episode. And in the context of style of the episode, just providing you another name, like, yeah, but about cars and motorcycles would perfectly do the job without any extra details or explanation or background. But I should definitely be sure that you know this type of episode, this type of style, and we talked about it before. If we haven't, and I would say this is like Dragon Capital, but like, oh, no, please don't.
All right. Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly there. Like that would be doing something like what you described in our communication would be adding a new relatively tiny layer on layers and layers and layers and layers of previous communication we're building up on upon our previous discussions of cortex and state of the apps and things like that. So it would be just a continuation of sort of ongoing conversation. If you start a new conversation with something like this, it's not going to be really helpful. Cool. Okay. So then example 2 is sort of covered. The lesson, the takeaway, I guess, is the be careful with metaphors. Just don't start with them. Maybe layer them on top of something else, but definitely don't start with them. Okay, cool. And then the third thing I put here was the case which I dubbed as system will be reliable. Things like that. And I think it is more pertinent to my work as an engineer, where I would be looking at a lot of situations where people would. Let me take a step back. I believe that specifically with system design, there are certain things about systems that cannot be built directly. Those are characteristics that are kind of derived from what the system really is and what it does, like reliability. You cannot say, oh, I'll build a reliable system. You can only kind of check posthumously that the system was reliable after it was built, or you can do some inferences. Oh, if we build system in this particular way, we know that there are common types of problems that with this kind of systems, and if we do it this way, it will avoid many of those problems, and therefore system in the end will be more reliable. You cannot simply declare our new system is going to be reliable. To me, that is a wish casting, and this is where I would expect more specifics, more detailed information about what makes you believe your system is going to be reliable. What exactly does it mean in this context to be reliable and stuff like that? Another example could be usable. Our app will have great usability. Maybe. What's exactly do you mean by that and how you're going to achieve it? I would be very interested in seeing that. That one flavor of example of this kind of fallacy. Another one is doing something and then expecting and then declaring that, oh, users are going to like it, or I'm shooting a movie and it's going to be great. Yes, emotionally, that's kind of nice thing to say. I can provide you emotional support for that. But whether your movie is great or not is not up to you to decide. For the viewers are going to decide after they see the movie. And more productive way, if we are talking about how to go about that movie, more productive way would be saying, I like things XYZ about movies, and therefore I want to shoot a movie that has XYZ characteristics. And then we hope that other people are going to like it as well. And if not, we just do our best to fulfill our creative vision or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that ring a bell?
Two thoughts on that. The first is about the reliability. I would say that if I get your example correctly, it's basically a designer who says that this interface is more user-friendly without actually checking with the users whether they can use it and whether they enjoy working with, whether it works for them, like whether it does the job.
We would even go further than that without even describing what the interface is going to be, just saying, oh, it's going to be user-friendly.
All right, yeah, then it's definitely jumping to conclusions. It does make sense. And I think it's, again, the level of communication. And in this specific case, I would probably consider speaking about the words, because the word will, in this case, system will be reliable, is something that Ukrainian people tend to percept as very certain. And whenever I talk to Americans or Brits, they have a tendency to use more modal verbs like might, may, should, and they illustrate very different levels of confidence. Like they might be nice, it might be a good party, it should be a good party, it must be a good party, it will be a good party, it's going to be a good party. So this confidence level is very different, and the sentence could sound very similarly, but this little thing does change the context a lot. Like from this system is going to be reliable versus the system should be reliable. Like there is a lot of difference here. And if we just speak about will, as a specific, it sounds to me either like a promise, like I commit to make it reliable, and it doesn't mean it's a prediction that it's certainly going to be, but like I will call you, basically, or the system will be reliable, like my intention rather than my prediction of getting there. But I guess it's kind of nerdy, and it's not about the key message. The thing that you're basically saying is that people have a tendency to give very vague characteristics to some kind of work, and they seem not specific. But again, it kind of brings me back to our previous two levels, depending on how well you know the person you're talking to. If I just tell you that the next episode is going to be fun, well, we don't know that for sure, but I like the notes. Based on our interactions, I can assume that you will like the notes. Right. Knowing something about our listeners, I may assume that they will like the notes. And I probably don't have to tell you that, like, it might be fun if something happens. The message is fine here. But once again, it requires me knowing you, knowing people around, and communicating it in this style. If we have a guest episode and there is like someone new who comes to our system, it requires a lot of explanation about the style, the way we communicate, the way we take the word, how long we interact with each other, like what is the role of the questions, how do we deal with some issues, how do we interrupt, and all these sort of things. It cannot be short. So I think that this is one of the most essential things, and that's an issue of people who, like you and I, have been recording the podcast for quite a while. When I started recording another podcast with new people every time, I realized that the instructions for the episode should be very different. Like in your case, I can just open your notes in the morning before the recording, and I think I'll be fine. But it took us how many years?
It took us a lot
to get here. And I think system will be reliable is a very similar case in this regard.
You know, I agree with a lot of what you are saying. And I also came to realize that something like this indeed is more problematic in a specific context, right? Someone saying, yes, we need this problem to be solved. We need to build a system for that. And that system better be reliable. It's kind of at this level in this context and at this level of communication, that's perfectly fine, because then the sort of implicit expectation is that when people actually come to design that system, they would list reliability as a requirement. They would go into defining like what specifically for this system being reliable means and how we are going to achieve that. And that's totally fine. Whereas if we come into, let's say, design review for that specific system and people just throw, it's going to be reliable. I'm like, no, like, tell me more. What do you mean? What do you mean by that? That means that, and I think this is a common takeaway for all of the examples we were discussing, that context matters a lot, and understanding the context and matching the style of communication and then the means of communication to that context and the goal means a lot. Like you better strike balance. There is no one size fits all, except striking the balance sort of fits all, but it's difficult.
Yeah, and I think also it's the way you shape it in the context of the sentence itself. Because when I say that this task manager is more comfortable, firstly, comfortable is quite a subjective matter. But then if you just say, I think this task manager is more comfortable, it makes this way more tolerant. Like, that's my opinion. Like you can agree or disagree, but like in my mind, this task manager is more comfortable. Let's talk about it. But people also tend to use some more objective descriptors, like this task manager is more effective. And when you bring in such things, yes, they can be measured. Like you can't really measure the comfort, because this is a very subjective thing, and this is where people either like it or dislike it, they enjoy it or don't enjoy it. Then effectiveness is something else. This is where you expect some numbers and illustrators and at least the criteria that would measure this effectiveness. It's like how fast people can learn, how much time it takes to list a ticket, or you basically require a definition of effectiveness. Moreover, what is enough or more if you compare a few things, like what are the things that are on the scale that you're comparing. So depending on what words there are, subjective or objective, and if they're objective, how they're going to be measured, it might have been communicated previously. Like as when we started talking about task managers, we described what the issue is, and then somebody says like, I've looked at these 5 task trackers, and this one seems the most effective. All right, like I know what you mean, because we talked about the problem, the issues. We have a technical task for the research, and you come up with your conclusion. I trust you. Let's take this one. But if it came out of context and somebody just comes to me and says like, we need a better CRM, this one is more usable, like,
we need to be more specific, right?
Please do.
When you were saying, when you said that I often, something along the lines, you add I think, it struck such a bell with me, because some time ago, specifically, I was thinking about the fact that quite often in different situations, when I pulled into stuff asking me questions or something, I want to add I think kind of very explicitly to say that, folks, this is, even though you might expect this to be kind of guidance or instruction, this is just my opinion, my best guess about thing, to send a signal that what I'm saying is not definitive, and you are welcome either to challenge it or to double check it depending on the context. And then I thought, should I be adding this to all of the messages that I sent, or should it be kind of explicitly understood that this is my just opinion, and whatever I say can only be my opinion, but in some situations I want that opinion to weigh a little bit more, like no, folks, you need to do it this way. And at that time I didn't figure out how to solve that conundrum, and I still sometimes add I think, or at times I just try to be even more explicit, saying like, to best of my knowledge, this is what it is. You may want to double check this information, or something along those lines.
I think it does depend on the context, because just a few days ago, I was at a meeting with top managers of manufacturing business, and there was the CEO. And when the CEO said, I think we should do something, it definitely meant that's what we're going to do. That was not the point of discussion. His opinion was the decision. If he thought so, that was supposed to be happen. In alternative cultures, like in my team, when I say, I think we should run this event, my team knows perfectly that they can disagree with me, they can postpone it, they can cancel it, they can reshape it, they can do whatever they think. And I believe that it's important to clarify when new people come, when you don't know what this means for you, for the person. Like, if you tell me that you think this episode was boring or too abstract or something else, can I disagree with you, or just leave you with your opinion and keep recording the same?
That's a good point. And I also remember reading once, long time ago, that adding, I think it was in the context of one-on-one meetings or something along those lines, where they were saying that you should communicate things as you believe in them, and also kind of implicitly as your opinion, because it is more difficult to argue with opinions. If I say I feel sad, like, what are you going to do? You're going to say, no, you are not feeling sad. How do I know that I'm not feeling sad? So it's difficult to argue with that. But I think it can work both ways. It's a little bit of a double-edged sword, right? If you communicate this as opinion for it not to be argued with, then it can be treated just, it's your opinion. I have another opinion, and I'll do it my way, because okay, I noted your opinion, that's fine. Or in other situations, you express opinion or feeling as a fact, and people start arguing with that, and it can also be unpleasant or ineffective, something along those lines. Cool. I think we've wanted to say bitten those 3 cases to death, but we probably didn't. We definitely unwrapped multiple layers on many of them. And in the end, I will have two questions for you. One would be the verdict of whether all of these things fall into the same category, or are they different? What's your opinion?
My first opinion is that in most cases, when we use the word all, we overgeneralize, and that seems like exaggeration. I would say that they could definitely have something in common. And based on our conversation, it's knowing who you talk to and what their need for context is and what kind of language they use and what they mean by saying something. And this comes with experience, this comes with effective communication, with clarification questions, etc. Whether they are about the level of context or specificity, I don't know, because these sentences are out of context, and I would like you to be more specific. When it was used, how it was used, who was in the room, and what was happening before, and what's going to happen after this sentence was said. So out of this context, it's really hard to say whether they are examples of the same kind.
That's fair. That's fair. And I realized that I definitely should have been more clear and precise to, to maybe articulate that those examples, those sentences were rather kind of a generic labels, maybe for a class of situations rather than specific sentences being said in a given context. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And plus one on understanding context and stuff. And then question number 2 is, what are your takeaways from what we discussed today?
I think that working with definitions really matters. And it matters even more when you speak about something complicated, like strategy or systems. This is a place where people are very rigid about the terms that they use. I can give a short example from our OKR workshop that we were running. I was trying to explain what OKRs are to a group of CEOs from one holding, like a group of companies. And they couldn't agree about a number of things. And it turned out that they very differently interpret words like vision, objective, KPI, etc. And we spent around 40 minutes making definitions that would work for everyone. And then we put those definitions on board, and then it took us a few hours to get used to using these meaning when we say something. I had to are you implying vision now, or are you implying goals, or what exactly are you saying? And it takes time for people to get adapted to the terms. That's why in Biweekly we tend to use or introduce definitions at the very beginning. I think it's also a lesson learned from a number of complicated episodes that we've had in the very, very beginning, trying to talk about one thing but having two parallel conversations. My biggest takeaway here is that these issues are probably universal in the meaning that they happen to most of us, but we just don't notice them. And when I go to my next meeting, I probably should be more specific.
I can relate to that. Like recently, or not so recently, I came across a situation when, like specifically talking about mission and vision, somehow you would expect that like everyone knows what that is, and everyone knows those words, and therefore everyone expects that everyone has the same understanding of what those things are. But I came across a situation when with one particular colleague that our understanding of what vision and mission is and like what's the relation between them was almost flipped. I think I was saying, I don't remember what I was saying, something like maybe a vision is primary or kind of the starting point and then mission, or something along those lines, but it was almost flipped. Like I can relate to that. For me, the takeaway is what we discussed in the first case, and then I think it went through the rest of the stuff, is understanding the purpose of communication, kind of the goal, the call to action that you hopefully explicitly put into the message you send, and then ensuring that that call to action can be followed. In later examples, I think the call to action may be more like if you kind of do system design presentation, you intend to get feedback to improve that kind of thing. Are you giving enough information for people to be able to follow that implicit call to action? So like being explicit about what you are expecting people to do in relation to your communication and providing them with enough information, context, or guidance is helpful. It can help navigate challenging communication situations, I think.
So, do you think that when we say at the very end of the podcast, good weeks, should we be more specific?
We could, but I think I would call this case strategic ambiguity. Like we want everyone to have a good week or good weeks, but it's up to them to define what that means exactly. So we can be specific, like folks, we wish you good weeks, but we expect you to define what that means. And in 2 weeks, report back how good your week was on the scale from 0 to 10. We don't want to go there. Like it's like
but we don't have to be that specific because we don't know if it's going to be a week. But we could say next 7 days from listening to this episode.
Thereof, yeah, it could be. At any rate, everyone have good weeks, maybe good holiday season, depending on when you get to hear us. We wish that the next period, whatever it is going to be better than the previous one, and all the best.
I still like good weeks.
Good weeks.